Alright, welcome to the Ironwood Gym. Today I want to go over a concept that I don't know exactly how to put it, whether it gets forgotten or whether it gets dismissed or overlooked, but it's a concept that I think we need to understand, and I think especially if you're looking at very high level lifters, that I think that those lifters I don't think they comprehend, and rightfully, maybe rightfully so, I don't know, but because of the level that they're at and what it's taken from them to get to that level, that this concept of what advanced is, or what a beginner is, or intermediate, gets misconstrued. Again, I don't know the proper word to put into this. But the concept that I'm going to discuss is training age versus, and utilizing training age to determine whether someone is a novice, a beginner, or an intermediate, or a advanced, and how you would, because knowing that would determine how that person needs to train. But what commonly, especially from more high-level lifters, and even some coaches that say this, basically the same type of thing, that if you squat this much, then you're advanced. But if you only squat this much, then you're a beginner. And I think we need to get over I don't think utilizing numbers from how much you lift, whether it be a total or an individual lift, I don't think it matters, is a good way of establishing how advanced someone is, or how much of a beginner or intermediate they are. There is a thing of strength standards, okay? So, and I don't think that this is really as big of a thing as it used to be. The goal used to be to total elite. But and I don't really have a problem with those standards. And above elite, I think, was professional, and below you had like class 1, class 2, and class 3, and then novice. So, and I don't even remember how it all went. I really kind of quit paying attention to it after a while. If you get into weightlifting, it's the same type of thing. You have, especially, and I don't know what current weightlifting does, I assume they do the same type of thing, but if you look back at some of the Russian manuals and how they define their training, if you're at a certain level, and really from what I remember of that, it wasn't weight, it was they used those levels to determine by training age, which is what I'm going to try to get into in this video. So a class 1 would be in their first year. A class 2 might be and I'm making this up right now because I don't remember the actual numbers. But if you go to, I believe it's the training of a weightlifter? No, I forget which book. I can't remember which manual it is off the top of my head. But it defines all that. It has it in a class system. So class 1, class 2, class 3, and then you have master of... I think there was something else in there, maybe advanced, and then master of sport. And it wasn't just looking at numbers, it also took into account training age and how long they've been. So for class 1, you were in it for this amount of time, 1 to 3 years, or 1 to 2 years, or maybe it's just your first year, and then 2 to 3 years in the class 2, and then you keep advancing up. I don't remember, and maybe I'm wrong on this, I don't remember seeing numbers for the snatch or the clean and jerk as qualifications for training. Okay, and that to me is a good way to look at it. But what we've gotten to is utilizing numbers. So I heard a very high level lifter talked about it doesn't get hard. He goes, you should be able to gain strength easily until you get to around 1,000 pound or something, some extremely high squat. You know, until that point, you should be able to gain strength easily. Well, that doesn't hold true for everyone because not everyone's dealt the same deck of cards, okay, essentially. And I don't want to say that, I don't want to put limits on anyone, but for those people that have gotten to that 1,000, 1,100, 1,200 pound squats, okay, yes, they probably had an easier time up until they got over 1,000, and then it became really hard, or up until they got to that last 100 pounds. But if you're looking at a 1,300 pound squatter, maybe it was fairly, you know, they progressed good until they got to 1,200, and then from 1,200 to from there on up, it was just like tooth and nail. They couldn't really just make steady progress. They really had to buckle down and work at it at that point. Not that they didn't work hard before. I think I'm misstating or minimizing what they did. But my point is that when they got closer to their top, or what they achieved as their top, again, I don't want to put a ceiling there and say that's as high as they could get. But at a certain point, age does catch up with you, and age is more of a determining factor than how much progress you can make, and it will stop at some point. But I don't want to limit anyone to that. But keep in mind, okay, this is the point I kind of got sidetracked, but if you're a 1,200 pound squatter, and it doesn't get really hard until that last 100 pounds, well, that's less than 10%. That's less than 10% of where you're getting to, okay? So if you, 10% would be 120 pounds. Well, what about someone that's worked for 20 years and has only gotten to a 500 pound squat or an 800 pound squat? Well, in that case, look at their last 10%. How long did it take them to get that last 10%? Okay, I'll use my bench as an example. Okay, I didn't hit 225 until I was out of high school. I believe I hit it my freshman year of college. And then the next 4 years, I really kind of took off and got up to a 295. And this is without, I'm only given without gear numbers. So these are my raw numbers. From 295 to 315 was another 4 years. So I went from 225 to 295 in 4 years. And then from 295 to 315 in 4 years. So that 4 years, I put on 20 pounds, whereas in the previous 4 years, I put on 70 pounds on my bench. Then it took me, let's see, that was 2000, I'm just rough, 2005. It was probably 2012. So 2010. So another 5 years to get the next 20 pounds. Okay, so at that, you really see at that point where it really gets to be very difficult. And I topped out at 336, and I'm hoping to get back there. But 2016 to 2018 happened, and it really set me back. So, but my point here is, when you start, my last 10% took me 8 years or 9 years. Okay, that last 30 pounds Took me like 9 years to get, or 40 pounds, just over 10%. That took a long time, where it took from going from 75 to 225, only took 5 years. From 225 to 295 took 4 more years. So 9 years to go from 75 to 295, but to go from 295 to 336 took another 9 years, if I've stated all that correctly. My point here is you have to look at how long a person has been lifting to know whether they're, and I'm not talking just random casual workouts. I'm talking being on a structured program. Most people do not start structured. I would still count that as experience as long as it's consistent. And then getting on to a structured program where you are specifically training for specific goals, and you have your training directed towards those goals. If you're doing that for a long period of time, 15, 20, 30 years, that's going to put you into that advanced stage. If you've only been training, I don't care if it's directed, how serious it is, but if you've, or how structured it is, but if you've only been training for 3 years or 2 years, you're a beginner. I don't care how strong you are. I don't care, and I've heard of stories of people squatting 400 pounds in just their first couple years of strength training. I've heard people benching close to 400 in their first 2 to 3 years of strength training. Okay, they are still a beginner. If they've only been doing it for 2 or 3 years, they need to be utilizing beginner strategies. Okay, strategies for beginners. Their first 5 years, for certain, they are a beginner. I don't care if you're super weak or super strong. After that, it starts to kind of siphon out depending upon your training, whether you move into the intermediate or you stay a beginner a little bit longer. You're going to be intermediate up until 10, I would say for sure. After 10, now you start to differentiate between intermediate and advanced. By the time you get to 15, if you've had 15 years of structured, directed strength training, then at 15 years, I don't care how strong you are advanced. Okay, and you need to be utilizing strategies for advanced lifters. Unless at 15 years you are still making a very solid, consistent, steady progress, then I would say you're still in the intermediate stage. I think the progress you're making also determines, to a certain point, how fast you're making progress determines whether you're intermediate, advanced, or beginner. Beginners tend to make progress faster, okay? And most of these people drop out. They quit at some point. But there are lifters, that just are not blessed with strength. They are not strong. They're never going to be strong no matter what they do and how hard they work. And I'm not making excuses for them, because they can still get stronger than what they were. They can still make progress, but it is difficult for them. Okay, for whatever reason. Maybe it's a genetic reason. Maybe it's they have a condition. Their body has a condition that makes these things difficult. Maybe it's just their overall build makes it tough to put on muscle mass and therefore tough to get stronger. I'm not going to sit here and pinpoint every single reason, but there are people that go many, many years and they are still, and train and work. They work for it, but they still aren't considered strong. But if they're doing it for a long period of time, at some point in time, you can't call them a beginner anymore. You can't call them intermediate if they're on structured programs. You have to train them as if they're advanced athletes or advanced lifters. Okay, how is their technique? These are all things that come into play. How has their programming been over that course of time? But these are the things we should be looking at, with training age being at the forefront. If you've been training for 25, 30 years, chances are you are training, not just randomly going to the gym to work out, but being consistent for 20, 25, 30 years. Chances are you are an advanced lifter, regardless of what your strength is. Okay, so please keep these things in mind when you are coaching other lifters, or if you are one of those lifters that's either looking down and saying these people aren't advanced because they're not strong enough, or if you're one of those lifters that's not that strong, but you are looking up at these other lifters and say, oh, well, I can't do their programs because I'm not advanced enough, I'm not strong enough. You can't use their weights, but you can still utilize their tactics because you have been training for a considerable amount of time. If you are new, less than 5 years, use beginner strategies. I don't care how strong you are, don't try to train like the advanced guys. What's going to happen is you're going to hit an early plateau because you're trying to use strategies that are for advanced lifters, that are meant to take that lifter that takes him a year to get a 5-pound improvement, and that's what he needs to do. As a beginner, train with linear periodization, train with basic programs, basic exercises that you make progress with. As long as you're making progress, keep doing it. When progress stalls, then it's time to change things up and start to consider how advanced have you gotten. Have you moved into that intermediate stage, or have you moved beyond, or are you in that in-between? But train at the level you're at, and that's more determined by how long you've been training than how strong you are. There are other factors that go into it as well, as I have mentioned, but keep in mind training age. 0 to 5 is beginner. 5 to 10 or 15 is going to be, 5 to 10 would be beginner intermediate. 8 to 15 would be intermediate, with 12 to 20 being intermediate / advanced, or 12 to maybe 18 intermediate / advanced. Everything beyond that, you are an advanced lifter. If you have been consistent and dedicated and had structured, directed training. That is it for today. Please check out the other videos on the page, on the YouTube page, this Ironwood Strength Show. Check out or hit that like button if you like what you're seeing. Please subscribe to the channel and share it with others. Share it with other lifters, share it with other coaches. But until next time, always be in the pursuit of strength.